Hello, book lovers. Welcome to the 132nd episode of Authors Love Bookstores, broadcasting here on A Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Kimberly Hensle Lowrance. If you're new to A Mighty Blaze, welcome. We're a group of volunteer creatives who host online literary events to help support books, authors, and the wider publishing community. Here in Authors Love Bookstores, my co-host, Joe Moldover, and I bring you conversations between authors and their favorite indie booksellers to shine a light on storytelling, creativity, and the small businesses that enrich our communities. If you're a regular viewer of the show, you may remember that we've set a goal for ourselves to spotlight a bookstore in every U.S. state, plus Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. And today, we are thrilled to be traveling, virtually of course, to the great state of Nebraska to welcome author JOY CASTRO and booksellers Kim Coleman and Leslie Huerta. Welcome to the show. We're very excited to have you all with us today. And let me jump in with some brief introductions about our guests. Well, I should say, Joy, your bio is amazing. And so there's so much wonderful things to say. So JOY CASTRO is the award-winning author of Flight Risk, a finalist for the 2022 International Thriller Award, the post-Katrina New Orleans literary thrillers Hell or High Water, which received the Nebraska Book Award, and Nearer Home, the story collection How Winter Began, the memoir, The Truth Book, and the essay collection Island of Bones, which received the International Latino Book Award. Her new novel is One Brilliant Flame, which we're going to be talking about today. Joy is also the editor of the craft anthology Family Trouble, memoirists on the hazards and rewards of revealing family. And she's the founding editor of Machete, a series of innovative literary fiction from the Ohio State University Press. Her writing has appeared in a variety of publications, including Plowshare, Salon, Brevity, Seneca Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and the New York Times Magazine. A former writer in residence at Vanderbilt University, Joy is currently the Willa Cather Professor of English and Ethnic Studies at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where she also directs the Institute for Ethnic Studies. I'm sure I missed a whole bunch of other amazing things you have done.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kimberly.
My pleasure. And then we have two booksellers with us today. Kim Coleman is the owner of INDIGO Bridge, an indie bookstore in Lincoln, Nebraska that highlights stories written by and for underrepresented communities. The store's mission is to be a welcoming and engaging space in the community and to make literature accessible to all. In addition, as if a bookstore is not enough, Kim is also a radiologist, a pediatric radiologist. And the internet tells me, Kim, that you were Nebraska's Physician of the Year in 2017. Kim is also the medical director of the Department of Radiology at CHI's St. Elizabeth's Regional Medical Center and has worked with the medical team for many years to serve the residents of Haiti. So I read also that Kim, we're going to talk about this more, but that Kim, or I should say Dr. Coleman, created INDIGO Bridge based on the proven philosophy that reading has a significant impact on a child's life. Wow.
Thank you.
These bios today, this is a very impressive bunch. Leslie Huerta is the owner of FRANCIE and FINCH. She left a career in the travel industry to fulfill a lifelong dream of opening a bookstore. FRANCIE and FINCH is an independent bookstore in Lincoln, Nebraska as well, that sells new books of all kinds, including arts and music, children's, history and nonfiction, and my favorite, plain old good stories written by great writers. FRANCIE and FINCH also sells work created by local artists and a selection of vinyl albums. Hello to the vinyl. It's fantastic. So as I mentioned, the store is located in downtown Lincoln, Nebraska. And Kim and Leslie, am I correct that your tagline is books, art, chocolate?
Well, yeah. So there's a local chocolatier in town, Lulubee's Chocolates, that makes these amazing artisanal chocolates, and we're one of the distributors here. But we had an artist, just real quick, that does this amazing. She recreates mannequins, like body forms of women, and she paints all these things on them. And I commissioned her to do one for me, and I said, you have to put a hidden message in there. So if you look, it says books, art, chocolate, but it's hard. You have to really look for it. But yeah.
That's like the perfect combination, isn't it?
It is.
I love it. Perfect. And coffee, of course. Well, welcome. We're so happy to have all of you here. To our audience, if you have questions for our guests, please post them below in a comment and we'll get to as many as we can later on. Okay, so enough talking from me. Let's jump in to hearing from all of you. So Joy, when I invited you to be on the show, you said, yes, I would love to do it, but I would like to be on with 2 bookstores. And I thought that was fascinating because they're both located in the same city. We've had authors on before with bookstores from across the country. We had an author on who had a bookstore in New Hampshire and South Carolina, for example. But we've not had an author on with 2 bookstores in the same community. So that told me so much about Lincoln, Nebraska, and the community there and the support for one another. But I'd love to hear that from you. So tell us about Indigo Bridge and FRANCIE and FINCH. What is it about these stores that are so special and the community that exists there?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. They have so much heart. The founding owners have so much heart. They have so much vision. And that infuses everything they do in both of the stores. There are other great bookshops in Lincoln for sure. But these are just my 2 favorites and the ones that I go to the most often. I think there's just a real spirit of warmth and a commitment to social justice, especially explicit with Indigo Bridge, which was founded earlier and in a different location. It's been in 3 locations, responding to the vicissitudes of the pandemic and so on. And, you know, it's just thriving. And then Leslie's bookstore is less than a block from my apartment, so it's as addictive as chocolate. Yeah,
it's always dangerous when you can walk to the bookstore. I mean, it's like the best possible situation, but it's also dangerous.
And I can walk to both of these bookstores, and there are other bookstores in downtown Lincoln. It's just amazing. Like the independent bookstore scene is beautiful here, and it's just a really thriving literary community. So I love that aspect.
Wonderful. So Leslie and Kim, tell us about how your stores came to be. Am I right, Leslie, that your store opened in 2016 and Kim, yours in 2008? Is that, did I have that for research? So can you tell me a little bit about Kim? Can we start with you? Can you tell us how did your store come to be? What made you want to decide to open a bookstore?
Oh, sure. So I had been working with different groups of kids and really wanted to have a place to promote literacy, just simple. And then as time went on, we realized how much more important it was to focus on social justice issues. To be honest, initially, I think we opened with this idea that we could have a space for people to come in with diverse ideas, whether it's political or religious or economic, and we could have some kind of polite discussion and be enlightened. And to be honest, as time went on, I think that I felt that might have come from more of a lack of awareness from my own position of privilege. And now I feel a lot more committed to, I think, lifting up underrepresented voices, because we're not all on this equal playing field where we can just come in and have a discussion about what we believe. But there's to me active persecution of underrepresented voices that I think we're just trying to be a space for. So that so when we started in 2008, we wanted to be the place to promote literacy and a place to have any discussions about things that we thought mattered. Like we think that we shouldn't have the death penalty. We think that certain environmental things matter, like we were opposed to the Keystone Pipeline. So we wanted to talk about anything we thought mattered in this public space. And we wanted to have books so that kids could learn to read and promote literacy, but also books that expanded our own horizons by learning about somebody else's experience that we didn't personally experience. So that's just kind of how we came to be in 2008.
Wonderful. That's why bookstores thrive, right? The idea that we can come somewhere and learn something beyond our own experience.
Exactly. So, I agree. I think it's like the antidote to xenophobia.
Yeah, it's true. Wonderful. Thank you. And Leslie, what about you?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, Kim, I remember when you opened, I was so thrilled. And I remember 2 things that struck me. One was, I think it was when you first opened and because you had a little cafe and you had a pay what you can philosophy. So it was, very inclusive and accessible. That was wonderful. And then also you did bilingual story time. on a
Yes.
regular basis, and I thought
Yeah.
that was so cool.
Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah.
Now tell me about when you opened.
Yeah, so FRANCIE and FINCH. So I, like you said, Kimberly, worked in the travel industry. I worked for people in the corporate world my whole life and was just weary and wanted to retire, but it was a little bit too, couldn't retire yet. But what am I going to do? And I was on a business trip, and the American Airlines magazine had an article about the resurgence of independent bookstores. And I was like, oh, that's so wonderful, because I would always, my whole growing up, moving, bookmobiles, libraries, bookstores were my thing. And I thought, that's just wonderful. Because this was at a time when they were saying bookstores and the print book was going downhill. And I remember thinking, oh, that's not good. So I was really pleased to read this article. And it covered, stores that we're all really familiar with, the Strand and Powell's and really famous, successful stores. But it also had some startups that were thriving. And that kind of got in my brain. And I just couldn't shake it. I was like a little kid that had a crush on somebody, and just kept thinking about, can I do this? Can Lincoln handle it? Should I do it? What's my husband going to say? And I took about a year and a half. But then we did it. Yeah, 2016. We're going on 7 years now, and I still pinch myself every day.
Wonderful. You both have very unusual or different names for your bookstores. And I wondered if you could speak to the inspiration behind the names. Leslie, can you tell us a little bit about? It's on your website, so I read already, but I want for our audience that hasn't read that. Can you tell us who are FRANCIE and FINCH?
Yeah, and if they haven't read it, we get all kinds of things. We just were written up in the New York Times. There's an article about Mari Sandoz, and they mention our store, and they called us FRANCIE and FINCH. And I've been called Frenchie and Fitch, and a lot of different things. But anyways, there are two names that connected with me as a child reading characters, kind of sentimental characters. Francie Nolan from A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and Scout Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. And Kim, what about you? What's the origin of Indigo Bridge?
I'm so glad to know that, Leslie. I'm sorry that I didn't know that before. That's so cool. Like I said, the bridge part was because we wanted to be a place where people could come together, sort of from political backgrounds, religious backgrounds, economic, just different experiences. And the bridge was the idea that we would come together and get to know each other. And I still like that idea. I just, like I said, I feel like that was a little bit from a position of privilege, and maybe I'm not saying we're not still trying to do that. We're also just going to really make sure we give the people who are underrepresented a space. But indigo, we just thought was a cool name, cool color. So our first explanation was just that indigo is just a really cool color. So
what's the biggest challenge of running a bookstore in your community? Is there something unique to Nebraska, or do you think the challenges facing your bookstores are the challenges that are faced by any bookstore in America?
You can go, Leslie.
I think there are a lot of them are the same across the country. In Lincoln, so we really, Joy mentioned that I think there's 5 or 6 of us now, bookstores in Lincoln. So we're a real collegiate group. We really support each other. We're all making it work. But the challenge for us being downtown is during COVID, all of the workers fled. So we're in a really cool historic building, surrounded by really cool historic buildings that housed offices and banks, and they're all gone. So that's a very different landscape. The online thing became really important for us. Tourism is really important for us. We're nestled between 2 of the major hotels in town and the theater district. So we're doing okay, but it's a different landscape.
Mm. Kim, what about you?
So I would definitely echo what Leslie said about our collaborative approach. Like, we are collaborative partners in promoting literacy. We just had a book crawl that was a citywide. It was collaborative from the independent bookstores to promote, people visiting all of our stores. And it went really well this year. It went really well last year. And then we had the finale of Independent Bookstore Day. But for my space, we also we're very involved with activism. And right now in Nebraska, we have, I think, an unprecedented number of bills that are attacking sort of freedom of expression. There's an unprecedented attempt to ban books, things like that. So I'm not sure if that's a challenge for running a bookstore, but certainly is a challenge for trying to hold space for expressive freedom and freedom of speech, basically.
We've definitely heard that from booksellers before, in booksellers in states where book banning has taken up. Well, it's impacting all of us across the country, but definitely there are some states where it's worse. And what we've heard is how vital it is to exist as a bookstore, to be that space that offers those books to people who won't be able to get them from the school library or from the public library. So yeah, it's the work that you're doing. We can't underestimate how vital bookstores are. I mean, that's why we just can't. I mean, I can't say it enough, right? That it's just what a loss it would be were it not for what you do. Joy, I feel like you want to say something.
Yeah. And both of these bookstores do offer space for community gathering and conversation, events. I mean, they're both very, very active in that regard. And people love to go to both of them, from what I've seen. And it is a place where people have conversations, serious conversations about important things. And I really appreciate that space.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And I'm sure at both of those bookstores we could find this book. Congratulations, Joy. I really enjoyed your book. I was saying to Joy before we went live, I was saying that I just felt so immersed in this book. I felt like I was there. I felt like I was like standing right next to the characters. I really enjoyed it, and I'm not the only one. The reviews are really terrific. The Los Angeles Review of Books says that One Brilliant Flame is a triumph of storytelling. The Latino Book Review calls this novel evocative and gripping. Booklist says this is a fascinating, informative, and important read, and it should be in all fiction collections. Yay! That's terrific. Congratulations.
Yeah, those were really lovely reviews. Thank you very much. And a fun thing about Leslie and Kim and their bookstores and this particular book is that I launched it in Key West where the book is set, and did a Florida tour. But then when I got back to Nebraska, I did 2 launch events back to back, one day and one the next day at each of their bookstores, which is the first for me. I launched, I think, like 3 books at Indigo Bridge, Kim, when it was in the Haymarket location, like with flan and with champagne and blah, blah, blah. And then that location closed and moved to a little bitty pop-up, which wasn't going to be a great space when Flightless launched. And Leslie graciously allowed me to have the launch for Flightless at FRANCIE and FINCH. And that was fantastic. But then when you both were open and both had space and One Brilliant Flame came out, I couldn't decide. And you were amazingly gracious to do that. And you would think it because, bookstores sometimes compete. Like when I go to give a reading in another city, is there a lot of feedback or is it just me hearing that?
There's a little bit of feedback, but we can still hear you.
Okay. Sometimes when I go to a city to give a reading at one place, there's sort of almost like a non-compete clause. Like I'm not. Oh, the feedback's gone.
Okay, great.
Okay, wonderful. Like you're not supposed to compete, but as Kim and Leslie said, there's a tremendously cooperative spirit of collective devotion to literacy. So it was a really beautiful, and they were 2 really different events, extremely different events with different foci. Yeah.
Roy, did you tell those other bookstores about your flan? I mean, that would have convinced them to just do whatever.
Thank you. I love to make flan when I launch a book. My grandmother's flan.
You make it and bring it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
It's to die for.
Oh, wow. You definitely should tell booksellers that.
Yeah.
But can you tell our audience a little bit about One Brilliant Flame?
For sure. Thank you. One Brilliant Flame is historical fiction, and it's a historical thriller. It's a suspense novel based on fact, and it revolves around the Great Fire of Key West, which happened in 1886. Key West at that time was a haven for Cuban rebels against Spain's imperial domination. That lasted quite long in Cuba. And in 1886, it was still quite strong. And since Key West was only 90 miles away by boat, many of the rebels moved there to have a safe space from which to organize. So they were anti-colonial and they were anti-racist. They were quite radical and they were pro-labor and very pro-intellectual. And I can say a little bit more about that. But this novel is narrated by 6 different characters, 3 young women and 3 young men. And they all have reasons to want Key West to burn. And that was really fun for me because at the time, the authorities really did suspect arson, but they could never prove it. So I thought, okay, if it was arson, then why would people want to burn Key West? What would their political motivations be? And what would their like personal motivations, rivalry, jealousy, etc.? And all of the characters are within the Cuban emigre community, but they occupy different socioeconomic statuses, different racial statuses, gender, and so forth. So I wanted to sort of get a little cross section of that social world at the time, which has been largely forgotten. Mostly in the United States, when people talk about Cuban American history, they start with 1959 and Fidel Castro's communist revolution. But there was another Cuban American history that was very strong in the 19th century. It was in New York, Key West, and Tampa, and most people don't really know about it. So I wanted to bring it to life in fiction for the readers who might never go read a history book. Yeah.
One of the things that I found really fascinating was that in your author's note, you write about how your great-grandfather, his writings were part of the inspiration for this book. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because like the idea that you can incorporate your own family history in a novel, I think is like such a unique gift, because many of us don't know our histories. Like we only know what's passed down, and families only tend to pass down a sliver, right? Like the stuff they want to talk about. We avoid things that may be difficult or complicated. And I love that you found something and then you were able to build off of that. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly the case for me. My family didn't talk about this history. It was as silenced in our home and family as it pretty much has been in the US education system, for example. So I grew up not knowing anything about it. And it was only when my father died that I found this printed memoir by his grandfather all about the time. So his grandfather, Juan Perez Rolo, had come from Havana to Key West in 1869 as a 9-year-old boy. And so he witnessed this whole exile rebellion movement, and it was very dramatic. At the time, there were duels fought, people killed in Key West about the rebel fight against Spain in Cuba. So, and everyone in the Cuban community was devoted to the cause of Cuban freedom. And this was something I grew up knowing nothing about. And so when we got this this document, a printed book, all in Spanish. I was very busy with other things, and I was very curious about it, but I had to do other work. And then in 2019, I was able to go to a research institute in Tampa all about the tobacco towns of Florida in the 19th century, and Jose Marti and the anti-colonial rebellion against Spain. And then all of a sudden I had the context for that personal reflection, which was a little bit confusing, right? My great-grandfather left all kinds of names and dates and the names of buildings and societies in Key West, like the Cuban Society in Key West. But I didn't really understand it. I didn't have a sense of the larger political landscape. And that material was there. Historian Otto Ferrer has a wonderful book about it, and historian Gerald Poyo has books about Key West, specifically in the Cuban community, but I didn't know about them. And my family they didn't know about those books. I would say that my family really had no idea that they were a significant part of history in any way, So it was a lost history for us. And so it's been a thrill to bring it back.
What a gift.
Yeah.
What a gift to be able to share that. Oh, Wonderful. Thank you. I definitely have more book questions, but I want to come back to Leslie and Kim. So we know that when you host a book event, one of Joy's book events, she brings flan, which probably puts her on the top of the list for authors that you want to have at your bookstore. But I wonder about other author events that you've had over the years. Can you think of one, or can you share one that was a particular favorite? One that when people at a dinner party, when someone asks, oh, tell me about an author event, which is the one that you always talk about? Your favorite. Leslie, yeah, please.
We do a lot of events, and we're all over the board. We've had the Lincoln Symphony Orchestra perform a little piece in here. We did a paranormal investigation of this old creepy building, and they're all tied into book themes somehow, some way. But probably one of the real quick. One was the statewide community read that is normally announced to the public by the governor. The governor refused to do it. And so we said, well, we're going to need to order more books for this event. And we did. And the people came out. We had like 100 people that showed up on a snowy day. It was all the roads were closed, but they traipsed in here to support that author. That was Ted Genoways in This Blessed Earth. And then another one, it was a book launch, and it was during the primary season for the 2016 election, 2016. And so all the news people were there in Iowa, which is right next door to us. So we actually had C-SPAN come and film the event for C-SPAN Book TV. And that was cool. That was all standing room only. And we had the director of the Ponca tribe came, and he had some seeds that we collected from ancient seeds that were passed out. It was really cool. That was Jane Klebb's book. That was a nonfiction book. But we love doing events. It's a small space, but you're surprised what you can do when you can move tables around and you have a backdrop of books that works with anything.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we've had an author talk about a ghost paranormal event before. That might be a first for us.
That was fun. We turned the lights down. We played spooky music. We had cold, what do you call the foam, the spooky stuff that was floating around. Yeah. It was creepy.
Interesting. Kim, what about you? Do you have a favorite author event that you've hosted over the years?
I have so many. Are you okay hearing me now?
Yes.
Okay. So many. But like recently we had Arden Eli Hill, Stacey Waite, and Ava Winters, some poets that were just really moving. I thought their poetry was moving. Ryan Salins is a trans author and expert who's actually early on in Indigo just changed the course of everything for us, I think, and we still work with him today. And he has, I'll mention again at the end when you ask for books we're excited about. But I think like David Sedaris. David Sedaris came around just trying to help brick and mortar bookstores. Obviously, he doesn't need our help, but we needed his help. So he came and twice actually, and his only requirement was that we not close until every single person had their book signed, and we were very happy to accommodate that. That was a very gracious thing for him to do for us. Those are some of the many awesome that come to mind first. Thanks for asking.
Oh yeah, we've heard from booksellers about David Sedaris before. He is, I think I appreciate you highlighting him because he's been mentioned as a great lover of bookstores, and that's so vital, right? The more we can send people to bookstores to buy books.
We sure appreciate it.
Yeah, it matters. So Kim, I know Joy mentioned a little bit that your bookstore, you were open, then you went to a pop-up, and then you moved to a new space. So you've had multiple evolutions over the years. And I wonder about when you look back at the beginning of your bookselling career, when the beginning days of Indigo Bridge, if you could go back and tell yourself some advice, what would you say to those early days, that Kim of those early days?
I think I would try to listen more. I think I had ideas and goals of what would be good, like we sometimes do. We go in and want to do some good, but I think I needed to listen more to what those people I wanted to do sort of good for or with had, what their goals were. We moved primarily because of the way the development occurred down in the Haymarket. It's a great, cool, awesome place. but we were trying to bring books to families that didn't already have all the resources. And the Haymarket development kind of became a place that mostly people who could go there had all the resources. So we were just trying to move around to where the families were who needed us, sort of. But I think my biggest advice would have been to listen. I hope I'm doing it now. I should stop now and make sure to listen to the people that you're trying to represent and lift up, and not to think that I have some idea myself.
Thank you. That's good advice for all of us for everything.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Joy, when I read this book, I kept trying to imagine the shape of the novel. Do you ever do that? Like when you read a book, you can see the shape. It's a braid, it's a circle, it's a diamond. And I actually doodled on a piece of paper, like, what's the shape of this book? And because I kept seeing it as like 3-dimensional triangles all connected together. Is that good? Did I do good? Oh, you're muted, Joy. Me.
Yes, when I was planning and plotting the book, I drew interlinking triangles. And now that I think about that, I want to give credit to author and amazing professor Lynn Barrett, who is just dynamite on plot, because I heard her give a presentation on plot, I think at an AWP conference, and she was talking about, I think she was breaking down the plot of The Great Gatsby and talking about the triangles among people, like a love triangle, and a triangle as being like this very strong structure because it has a wider base, but then like if they're interlinking, right?
Yep.
And there are multiple, and they, you can't even do it in 2 dimensions, like you say. Yeah. So exactly. That's exactly right. And I do that as well. I did that with Flight Risk too. And I used to do an assignment when I taught modernism, and I had students like try to draw the shapes of all the novels that we read throughout the semester, based on something that Virginia Woolf did in one of her notebooks about her structure for To the Lighthouse when she was planning it. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Let's try it. And it was so illuminating to see how the students grasped form in language and then translated that into visual shapes. It was really great. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad. I feel like I clearly paid attention in English class. But it's interesting because when I started reading the book and I realized that you had 6 POV characters who were all first person, I thought that was fantastic. And I wondered how they all were going to fit together. And I think that's sort of the structure of the novel. You don't see that very often, of having 6 POVs. I mean, there are many examples, and I read an interview with you in which you said As I Lay Dying is an example, and there are many others. But I thought that decision to have 6 POV characters, and they all come in different rhythms, right? The men are not as dominant as the women in appearing in the POV position. And that sort of made me wonder, like, what is the shape of the book? And not all books afford themselves or afford me as a reader clarity to do that. So when you can find it, it's exciting because it helps, it helps you view the book differently.
It does. It does. It helps you conceptualize things. And for me, it made the structure cleaner as I was drafting and then as I was revising. And you're right about the fellows getting less airtime. That's just a little bit of reparative justice there.
I feel like they've had lots of stage time in the past, in other novels. So one of the things you said in an interview about this book was this thing about your characters. You said, mentally making friends with the potential for humiliation and defeat was incredibly liberating. I like taking risks. And I thought that was really interesting. And I wondered, are you talking about humiliation and defeat that the characters go through, or did you mean you're like taking a risk and writing something different? Okay.
Me as an author, when you realize you could do your absolute best and critics would loathe it and readers would despise it and people would be angry at you and you could totally fail. When you realize, yes, that's absolutely the case. So am I not going to try it? No, I'm going to try it and open up, myself for that potential critique, which could be devastating, but then once you've made friends with it, you're like, okay, maybe I'll fail, but I really want to try, so for me, that makes every new book a real challenge and exciting. When I have not only socio-political claims at stake, but also aesthetic risks at stake, it makes it more fun. And this was the first novel that I've written with multiple points of view. So,
did you have a favorite character to write?
Yes, I did. Do you want to guess who it was?
Well, I mean, Sophia was not very nice. And so I would imagine that that's sometimes fun to write someone who is probably very different than yourself.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's hard. I love them all. Like I really loved Chavetta. Am I saying her name correct?
Chavetta, yeah. Well, I want to say thank you for assuming that I'm not necessarily like a racist, sadist, classist, mean girl, but it was really fun to write Sophia, to explore like what would make someone like that tick,
exactly.
and also what would her positive characteristics be, right? And she has some, right? She's really a sort of prototypical new woman or a feminist. She wants to be self-determining. Anyway, I don't want to, but yes, but Chavetta was by far my favorite. Yeah.
Because all of the characters in a way are struggling for power, right? Their own power, their own voice, their own path, their own future, but in very different ways.
Absolutely. Yes, very much so. And I really wanted to make them all have very distinctive voices. A common reader complaint that I've heard is that when there's a multiple POV novel, that the voices start to blur. And so I wanted to be very, very careful about that and make them extremely distinct from one another, so that wouldn't happen. I loved trying to make them very differentiated at the sentence level.
Yeah. They are. They're very. I can assure all the readers out there, you will not get lost. Yeah. Leslie's nodding her head. Yes.
Yeah, the little graphics that you did at the front of each chapter were a nice kind of guide, but we didn't need them because the voices were all so unique. You got to know who was speaking without looking at that. But I love those the knife for Chavetta and the cigar rolling for.
So just to explain to our audience, so we'll have a character's name. So this is Zenaida. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for fixing me. Sure. Yeah. And then there's a quill and ink because she's a writer. And then Sophia, there's a fan because she's
rich.
Rich. So and then all of the characters have that little icon, which I agree, Leslie. It's a reminder in your brain, like, oh, this is where I am now. It's a very clever decision. So one of the things you just mentioned, Joy, was this idea of taking a risk in your writing. And it very much is what Leslie and Kim have done in opening a bookstore, like adding something. Leslie's changing careers, Kim already having a successful career and adding yet another thing on what I imagine is a very busy plate. And I wonder, has the dream met the reality? Like the idea and the hope of opening a bookstore, has it aligned with what you thought it would be? Is it better? Is it harder? Kim, what would you say?
Far surpassed. I had zero thought for something as magnificent. And I'll tell you why, though, not because of me, it's because of our staff. We have the most amazing, dedicated, passionate staff with vision about like our mission. So I would have never expected. And we will close on days when we have to go down to a rally at the Capitol because we have legislation currently being discussed. So our ability to take action about the things that we matter is beyond my wildest dreams. But I know it still seems small, but for me, I didn't have any expectations. So it was easy to surpass. That's all I got.
Wonderful. Leslie, what about you?
Yeah, as I said, I still pinch myself every day. Yeah. I think, I'm just surrounded by the most interesting people. And in fact, we have a hashtag, you meet the coolest people in bookstores. And I don't know what I think about my old days when I had to travel around and hang out with people that weren't like my kind of people, but I did it because I was a salesperson, and they were great people, but it was just different. Where now I'm surrounded by, I mean, everybody that comes in has interest in the books that we're selling, and we can talk. And I don't know, I pinch myself every day. It's gotten better, and we still have a long time in front of us.
Great. One thing our audience always loves is when we have a little bit of time in our interviews to talk about book recommendations, because it's nothing as special as hearing from an author and booksellers about books that they love, that are doing well in the store. And so I'd love to hear from all of you about your favorite Nebraska novel, your favorite Nebraska author, or just books that are popular or that you're interested in, just any recommendation of something that's piquing your interest. Who wants to go first? Joy, do you want to tell us some books you'd like to draw our attention to?
Yes, love to, but I failed the assignment. These are not
It's okay.
Nebraska. Yeah, these are all related to Cuba. Let me see how to. Yeah, so this This is a really fantastic history book by Ada Ferrer, Cuba, an American history, and it won the Pulitzer last year. It's brilliant, and it's written as beautifully as the best novel that you've read. She's a dynamite writer as well as a meticulous historian, and she's breaking open old stories about Cuba and telling us a really interesting new one. This one is called Forbidden Notebook by Alba de Céspedes. Alba de Céspedes is the granddaughter of Carlos Manuel de Céspedes, who uttered the famous cry of Yara, which was the cry of rebellion against Imperial Spain in 1868. And she was Cuban-Italian. And this novel is a domestic novel about a working housewife in Rome who gets a notebook and starts to keep a journal. And it changes everything about her life in really interesting ways. That's just out this year. Another one, and I just have two more really fast.
It's great, no problem.
This is The Apartment by Ana Menendez, a Cuban-American author in Miami. And it's set in an apartment in one of those beautiful Art Deco buildings on South Beach in Miami. And it's over decades and decades, all the different people who inhabited apartment 2B, and then their stories and how they intertwine as the years go by. Fascinating. And then the last one is not in print yet. It's called Dressing. I just have the bound manuscript, but it's called Dressing the Saints, and it's a collection of stories by Cuban-American writer Araceles Gonzalez Azendorf. And I ran across one of the stories in a great collection and was teaching it in a course. And I just wrote to her and said, "This is so great, I'm teaching it." And she's like, "Oh, let's meet when you're in Tampa, launching One Brilliant Flame in Florida." And so we met and chatted, and she's like, "Oh, would you like to read this?" And I was, "Of course I would love to read the collection." So it's her debut collection. And it's about the older generation of Cuban-American immigrants in Florida, the 59 generation, but the older ones, older than Araceles, for example. Anyway, I'm really excited about all four of those books, so I recommend them highly. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing them. And to our audience, we're putting links below to all of these books where you can order them or even pre-order them for the one that isn't quite out yet. Kim, what about you? Do you have any recommendations that you
yeah, can I really quickly say that I know, sorry, I did have some of Joy's to show off to make sure that her memoir, that we don't forget, because her fiction has been awesome, but her truth book, this is JOY CASTRO's memoir, which I thought was really amazing and changed my life. Huh, Joy, it did. And also, speaking of an author who keeps a journal, when Joy came and spoke to some teen parents with me, she shared with them the power of keeping a journal, and they went away determined to just write down their goals for life as though it was already happening. So that whole manifesting your whole future was really, she impactfully communicated with these young people. So the staff are really looking forward to, there's a comic called Enlightened Transsexual Comics. It's out May 17th. It's apparently a social satire collection of sci-fi comic strips which approach gender issues in a funny, surreal way. I think that would be cool. I would like to read it myself. Another staff is really excited about Notes on Her Color. Jennifer Neal is the author, out May 23rd, which is magical realism, and it's a novel of a young Black Indigenous woman who learns to change the color of her skin. The Zadie Smith novel, The Fraud, which is out in September, about who gets to tell their story and who gets to be believed. And I guess Elliot Page memoir, which is out in June. Okay.
So exciting.
Now, Ryan Sallins, I mentioned earlier, has written Second Son and Transforming Manhood. Those two books have been really impactful to me and a lot of people. But he's still working on one that he's hoping to be out in 2024. So that's a ways off, called Finding Me, Finding We. It's a story about finding yourself and connection to others in a world that is so divided. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, those are great books. Thank you for sharing them. Again, we'll put links below for everyone to check them out. And Leslie, what about you?
Yeah, those are a lot of great ones. Thank you for all of the tips, everyone. I went through my art basket and that just came in this past week and found a couple that I'm real excited about. And I haven't got through them yet, but the one is kind of Nebraska. How to Say Babylon. It's a memoir by Sophia Sinclair. I don't know, Joy, if you might know that writer, but she won the Hilda Raz Prairie Schooner Prize for poetry for her book Cannibal, that came out, published by University of Nebraska Press a few years ago. But this memoir is compared to Educated and Born a Crime, and it's about her growing up in a Rastafarian family with an incredibly strict father, and how she gets through that and becomes a creative writer. But this looks really good. I'm excited about that. This is in 9th. And then completely different, I'm actually in the middle of this one, Shark Heart, A Love Story, and it is by Emily Habeck. It releases in August also, and it's a sweet love story about this newlywed couple, a man and a woman, and he has a disease and he's turning into a shark, and he has to swim away. So it's magical realism, but it really captures their relationship and how they're going to deal with this loss and transformation that he's going through, and she doesn't want to let go. I'm anxious to see how this is going to end, but I'm really enjoying that one. Let's see, this one is out now, Stealing by Margaret Verbal. I don't know if any of you might be familiar with it. It came out in February. It's written in a journal style from a young girl. She's like 9 or 10, I think, when she starts, and she's into Nancy Drew and bookmobiles, and she's on the Indian reservation. She's Cherokee. She lives with her father. Something horrible happens, and she's sent to a Catholic boarding school. And there's some horrific parts in there, but there's also some really charming parts about this little girl dealing with it. And she writes everything down. So in the end, because she wants to expose what it was really like. This is very good. And this is out right now. And I think, oh gosh, I don't know how much time I have. Wild Girls by Tia Miles. This I got to read the real quick little thing here. National Book Award winning New York Times bestselling historian shows how girls found self-understanding in the natural world and became women who changed America. And it highlights people like Louisa May Alcott and Sacagawea and who else was in here? Harriet Tubman, Dolores Huerta is in here. And this one releases in September.
Awesome. Thank you for these recommendations. I love how different they all are. And that's sort of the joy, right, of books, that there are so many to read and there's something for everyone. So thank you so much for sharing these with us. Joy, what's next? What's next for you?
Thank you. Really fast, just picking up on something that Kim said about who gets to tell their story and who gets to be believed. This is just out. Whoa, The Me Too Effect by Lee Gilmore. I've read her 3 previous books, and they're brilliant. She's brilliant. And I've started this one, and it's really excellent. Okay. What happens when we believe women? So that's really great. And then I wanted to add to the Stealing book that you mentioned, Leslie. There's a book coming out this summer by Tom Gannon called Birding While Indian, a mixed memoir. And he's originally from South Dakota, going back to what you said earlier, Kimberly, but he teaches at the University of Nebraska, and it's a memoir of about a number of things, but including being sent to an Indian boarding school. He's a colleague of of ours at the university. So I just wanted to mention that. In terms of what's next, more teaching, more writing. I'm working on a collection of short stories. Thank you.
Excellent. So we've included social media links to the stores and to Joy below in the comments. So please go follow so you can be up to speed on everything that's happening, and you can keep an eye out on Joy's other writing. Her website has a great list of all of her other places where you can find her work. I hate that we're coming to the end of our time, but we are. It's really been such a pleasure talking with all of you. And now it's time for the last question, which always goes to the booksellers.
Oh yeah.
So Kim and Leslie, please finish this sentence for us. Running a successful bookstore is part hard work, part luck, and part what else?
You want me to go?
Yeah, sure, Kim.
Passion.
Passion. Absolutely.
I'll go the other direction. Cheap wine and cookies.
That too.
Maybe we'd say flan too.
Except for when Joy comes to town and Marco makes his special cocktails. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kimberly, for all the research and the work you did and hosting us. This was beautiful.
Yes,
oh, well,
thank you.
It's my pleasure. I'm really grateful that you spend time with us here on Authors Love Bookstores, and that we get a little chance to see the work, some of the work that you're doing. And I encourage our audience, if you're in the Lincoln, Nebraska area, definitely step by FRANCIE and FINCH and Indigo Bridge. And if you like, to our audience, if you liked today's show, and we certainly hope that you did, please subscribe to A Mighty Blaze on Facebook to get notified about all of our other events. Or if you're not a Facebook person, hop over to our website to sign up for our newsletter. It goes out once a week and gives you the rundown of all of our shows that are coming up. And we will be back in 2 weeks on May 17th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Central Time, with author Jane Roper and Sherman's Books in Maine. We'll be talking about Jane's new book, The Society of Shame. Leslie, Kim, and Joy, thank you again for being with us.
Thank you.
Kimberly, thanks for what you're doing. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And so join us again in 2 more weeks for another episode of Authors Love Bookstores. Until then, be well and keep reading. Bye, everyone.